There is a very profound teaching in Kabbalah about life, death, and the nature of the human ego, and when I first began studying it, I realized it completely changes the way we understand why suffering and even death exist in the first place. According to the ancient Kabbalistic teachings and the Zohar, death is not simply a biological event. It is not merely the result of disease, accidents, or aging. Those things are only the visible expressions in the physical world. The deeper cause, according to these teachings, is something far more subtle. Death is described as the culmination of a lifetime of reactive consciousness, a lifetime in which the ego repeatedly separates us from the source of life itself. In Kabbalah, the source of life is often described as the light of the Creator. This light is the energy that sustains everything in existence, from the smallest particles of matter to the vast systems of the universe. Every living being is connected to this light, but human consciousness has something unique within it, the ego, and the ego creates distance between ourselves and that source. Every time we react purely from selfishness, from jealousy, from anger, from the need to receive only for ourselves, we create a subtle form of separation. It is as if a curtain is placed between us and the light. At first, the curtain is thin, barely noticeable. But over time, as reactive patterns repeat themselves throughout life, more and more of these curtains accumulate. Eventually, the distance becomes so great that the connection to the source becomes completely obscured. In the Kabbalistic view, that state of total disconnection is what we call death. This is why the Kabbalists say that what people normally call the angel of death is not actually a being that comes to take life away. Instead, it represents the process of disconnection itself. It is the result of the distance we create between ourselves and the source of life through our own reactive nature. But here is where the teaching becomes even more interesting. Even when disconnection happens, the light itself never disappears, the light of the Creator. The life force that sustains existence is constant and unchanging. Think of electricity flowing through a power source. Even if you unplug the lamp, the electricity still exists. The light goes out only because the connection has been interrupted. In the same way, the spiritual light that sustains life never stops shining. It is always present, but our perception of it becomes dimmed because of the barriers we create through ego and reactive consciousness. Kabbalah explains this with a very powerful metaphor. Imagine a room with a bright light shining in it. If you hang a curtain between the light and the room becomes darker. Add another curtain, and it becomes darker still. Continue adding layers, and eventually the room becomes completely dark. But the light itself never changed. The darkness exists only from the perspective of the room. This teaching leads directly into one of the most important principles in Kabbalah, the concept of sharing. When people hear the word sharing, they often think it simply means giving money, helping someone in need, or offering time and effort to support others. And while those are certainly forms of sharing, the deeper Kabbalistic definition goes much further. True sharing begins at the exact moment when our ego resists giving. When the ego says, I don't want to give, I don't want to help, I don't want to lose something that belongs to me, that moment of resistance reveals the selfish consciousness within us. If we override that instinct and choose to give anyway, we perform an act that actually transforms our nature. Each time this happens, a small portion of the reactive ego is removed. The Kabbalists describe it as eliminating a fragment of what they call receiving consciousness, the tendency to live only for the self. Even a tiny reduction of that selfish pattern brings us closer to alignment with the light. But there is an even deeper level of sharing that the teachings describe. Sometimes sharing is not about giving something material at all. Sometimes it is about facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Admitting our jealousy, our insecurity, our envy, or our selfish tendencies is considered by Kabbalah to be a profound act of sharing. When we honestly acknowledge these traits instead of hiding them, we step into a proactive state of consciousness. Instead of allowing the ego to operate unconsciously, we bring awareness to it, and awareness weakens the ego's power. There is a very powerful example given in the Kabbalistic tradition. Imagine being able to tell your best friend or even someone you consider a rival that you feel envy when they succeed, not to harm them, but to recognize and expose the ego within yourself. That kind of honesty dismantles a portion of the ego's hold on the soul. Each time we do this, another curtain between us and the light is removed. This is why Kabbalists believed that the true path of spiritual transformation required constant self-examination. In traditional Kabbalistic schools, students would even challenge one another to reveal their blind spots. Friends, colleagues, and even rivals were invited to point out flaws in each other's behavior. To the ego, that sounds unbearable. But from the perspective of spiritual growth, it becomes an incredible tool for transformation. A true teacher understood exactly how to trigger the ego of the student, not to harm them, but to expose the reactive patterns that kept them disconnected from the light. And a wise student would welcome that discomfort because they understood what was at stake. The goal was not simply moral behavior. The goal was immortality. In these teachings, immortality does not mean the body living forever in the way people often imagine. It refers to a state of consciousness so aligned with the source of life that the separation between the soul and the light disappears. The ancient Kabbalists believed that when a person continuously removes the layers of ego through acts of sharing, honesty, humility, and transformation, they gradually dissolve the forces that create disconnection. And if disconnection is the root cause of death, then reconnecting to the light becomes the path back to life. The teachings even go so far as to say that humanity has misunderstood the nature of life and death for centuries because we focus only on the physical effects rather than the underlying cause. The real work is internal. It is the daily practice of observing the ego, confronting it, and choosing a higher response. That is why Kabbalistic students dedicated themselves completely to acts of sharing, not just comfortable giving, but uncomfortable giving. They deliberately practiced generosity, humility, and service to others because each of those actions weakened the ego and strengthened their connection to the light. They understood something very profound. The universe itself responds to our level of consciousness. When we live only to receive for ourselves, we align with separation. But when we shift into sharing consciousness, we align with the very force that sustains creation. And the closer we come to that alignment, the more the light flows through our lives. If these teachings resonate with something deep inside you, it's because the soul already recognizes truth when it hears it. The path of transformation begins with awareness, awareness of the ego, awareness of the patterns that keep us disconnected from the light, and the willingness to shift our consciousness toward sharing and growth. If you want to explore these ancient teachings more deeply, I share this kind of wisdom regularly here. Follow for more spiritual insights, and if you're ready to go deeper into understanding your own soul path, you can book a private session with me through the link in my bio. I guide people through these same principles so they can reconnect with their purpose, their energy, and the deeper truth of who they are.